After identifying these stakeholders, it is important for you to analyze their interests. You need to analyze their interests, their influence, and their potential contributions. You have used the previous techniques to map out who these stakeholders are. But beyond just identifying these stakeholders, you need to analyze their interests, their influence, what their influence can be on your community engagement efforts, and their potential contributions. So, this analysis helps you to understand the dynamics and relationships among stakeholders, enabling you to tailor engagement strategies accordingly. Now, let's look at the strategies you can employ to conduct this stakeholders analysis. We have what we call the interest mapping, the power interest mapping. There's a technique for that can be used to map the interest of your stakeholders. You can create a map that will show you whether their interest is high or low. And from this result, you'll be able to know how to prioritize engagement efforts and communication. Power and influence assessment is also a strategy to analyze stakeholders' interests and influence. Now, the power and influence assessment is to evaluate the level of power and influence each stakeholder holds. For example, you may want to see if you get the buy-in or if you don't get the buy-in of this particular stakeholder, how will it affect your community engagement efforts? It will also help you to determine who has the decision-making authority and who can influence outcomes. It will also help you to categorize stakeholders as high or low in terms of influence. Let's look at the strategy of mapping interest and power. Now, there's what we call the power interest grid. The power interest grid is a very important aspect of community engagement efforts because it helps you to map out who are the people with high influence and low influence. Once you are able to map these people, these stakeholders out, you'll be able to know who are the people that are important to your community engagement efforts and who are the people that are less important to this community engagement effort. So, stakeholder analysis is a way of determining who among stakeholders can have the most positive or negative influence on an effort, who is likely to be most affected by the effort, and how you should work with stakeholders with different levels of interest and influence. Remember that this influence and interest can be either positive or negative, depending on the perspective of the stakeholders in question. Now, you need to start thinking about how you can get the buy-ins of people with high influence and high interest. For instance, on the right upper quadrant, we have the high influence. We have the high influence, high interest, which they are called the promoters. Now, it is in this quadrant we can have the media, we can have government agencies, we can have the key stakeholders. The key stakeholders especially falls under the promoters category, who have high influence and high interest. We have another category, which is the left upper quadrant, Who are the people with high influence and low interest? You also need the buy-in of these people. The secondary stakeholders can fall under this left upper quadrant. For example, you want your community engagement is about children or young people. These young people, they have family members, they have parents, they have teachers, they have people that are maybe religion leaders. Now, if you want to engage these people better, you need to get the buy-ins of these people that have influence. They have high influence, and they may not necessarily have interest in whatever you want to do. Even though they don't have that high interest, but they still have high influence. So they have influence on the outcome of your community engagement efforts. So you need to also seek their buy-in. You need to think of ways to convert their negative interest to positive interest if they have negative interest. So they have low interest, but you need to make sure that they are you buy them in, they are bought into whatever goal or objective of your community engagement is. We have the right lower quadrants. We have the low influence and high interest. The low influence and high interest people, they are the people that they have a lot of interest in this, but they don't have much influence. Primary stakeholders could fall under this category. You need to also make sure that they are involved in the project that you want to embark on, or the community engagement efforts. Now we have the low influence and low interest. That means they don't have interest and they don't have influence. You may want to just keep them on the side and continue to monitor them. With time, they could be converted from this category to another category. This is called the power interest grid, and it is very important. You need to map out your stakeholders. And when mapping, you need to understand who are the people that has high influence, who are the people that have low influence. So you have to plot this, maybe using a cardboard or even your computer, and start listing these stakeholders that you have identified using those techniques we have mentioned earlier. Each of these stakeholders, you need to plot them, you need to start listing them so that you will know who to direct your engagements at, who to focus on well. You need to understand who are the people that need much energy, who are the people that doesn't really need much energy, because this will help you. It will help you allocate your resources well. It will save you time, and also it will make your community engagement have better outcomes. You could also use this potential contributors assessment. Remember that we are analyzing stakeholders' interest. We are analyzing stakeholders' influence and their potential contribution. So another technique to analyze stakeholders' potential contribution is to carry out what is called the potential contributions assessment. So how can you do this? You need to identify what each of these stakeholder group can contribute to the project. For example, the key stakeholders, the funders falls under the key stakeholders, the funders of your project. So if, for example, on this particular EP election campaign, your key stakeholder diaspora vote falls under your key stakeholders because they are the ones that will support you. They are the ones that will contribute towards how the success of your community engagement efforts. They have a lot to contribute. They have they can contribute in cash. They can contribute with getting their partners to support whatever you want to do. So they are potential contributors. So you need to sit down and analyze who are your potential contributors. You need to identify them because they are very important to your project. So you need to assess their resources, their expertise, their networks, and potential support. If you have identified the community, you have identified the stakeholders, you need to start thinking about people that have potential contributions. They are potential contributors. It could be head of community. Many times, if head of community should get bought into a community engagement effort, then members of that community may also follow suit because the head of community is already interested. So this, for example, this head of community falls under the promoters category, which are the people that have high influence and high interest. So if you want to know the potential contributors, you need to carry out potential contributors assessment. Start thinking about what each of these stakeholders group can contribute to the project. Now let's look at engagement preferences survey. You need to design a survey. Now this engagement preferences survey is pointing towards how you can get the interest of these people. When you understand how to engage them, then you'll be able to get their interest. Because from getting their from knowing how to engage them, you'll be able to get their interest. There are some people that what they prefer is email. Some people prefer you to give them phone calls. Some people may prefer to give to reach them through social media. So some people may prefer physical meeting. You need to ask so that this will help you in getting the interest of these stakeholders. So how can you do this? You can do this by designing a survey or questionnaire to gather information about stakeholders' preferences. You can't just conclude. You can't just conclude that this stakeholder, we are going to be using email to talk to them or to engage them. You need to ask because all this also shapes the outcome of your community engagement effort. Remember that it is engaging, interacting. So if you are unable to interact well because you don't know the engagement preferences of these stakeholders, that means it will affect the outcome of your community engagement efforts. There's also key informant interviews. You need to conduct one-on-one interviews with influential stakeholders. You need to discuss their perspective, concerns, and as well as potential contributions, because this will help you gain insight into their motivations and interests. Remember, what we are doing here is analyzing stakeholders' interest, influence, and potential contribution. So you can use stakeholders mapping to analyze how high is the influence and interest of your stakeholders. you can use the potential contributions assessment to identify what these stakeholders are bringing or can bring into the project. You can use this engagement survey to get to know how well your stakeholders are invested in communication. So, after you have analyzed your stakeholders, you now know their interests, you know their influence, and you know their potential contribution. It is important to also understand how well you want to engage them, because from the categories, you'll be able to understand who you need to invest your engagement on and who you need to just keep on a low level. So this is a stakeholder engagement matrix. You can see that we have 4 quadrants, just like the power grid matrix, the interest power grid. So this stakeholder engagement matrix will let you understand who you should manage closely, who you should monitor, who among the stakeholders you should keep informed, and who you should keep satisfied. Now let's look at this. Stakeholders with high power and high interest. Who are the promoters? Remember the stakeholder mapping I have mentioned earlier. The promoters are people that have high power and high interest, and these people, you need to manage them closely. That means you need to, your engagement game should be so up. You need to engage them from time to time. You need to be active with your communication. You need to be active with your collaboration. You need to involve them in decision-making processes because they have high power and high interest. Remember that I've mentioned an example that the key stakeholders, who are the government, the media, the head of community, they fall under this category. So you need to get them so involved because they have significant impact on the project outcomes and they are highly engaged on whatever you are doing, on whatever your community engagement effort is. The high power, low interest, you need to keep them satisfied. They are the latent. You need to keep them satisfied. They have high power but low interest. So, for example, family members of the young people you want to engage during the community, the campaign, the election campaign program. These family members, you need to also keep them informed. Maybe the progress of your engagement or your plan. You need to keep them informed. You need to also address their concerns so that they will be able to influence your target audience because they have high power. They have high influence, even though they are not interested in whatever engagement you are doing. But they have that influence that can impact the outcome of your engagement. Let's talk about the low power, high interest, low power, low interest. So the low power, high interest, you need to keep them informed. It is very important. You need to keep them informed because they don't have power, but they have high interest. They could be the community members. They could be the community members. Even though they may not be your target audience, but they could be the community members that have shown interest in whatever you are doing. For example, you want to engage young people in a community, but some of the parents also showed high interest, even though they don't have power, they don't have influence. But because they have shown high interest and the engagement effort is not for them, they are not your target audience. Although they are not your target audience, but they are still showing high interest in your engagement effort. That means they are still a part of your community engagement effort in a way. So they are the defenders. Going back to the stakeholders mapping, they are the defenders. That means they are the ones that will start telling, they may start telling other people, other young people about whatever you are doing and start attracting them, even though they don't have that high influence, but because they have that high interest, they might get involved in the in whatever you are doing. So you need to keep them informed. You need to keep them you need to update them regularly because they have strong interest. So you need to also seek their input when relevant because they have high interest. They want to know. They want to know why you are carrying out that community engagement effort, even though they don't have that influence. But because of their high interest, they might help you to push your community engagement further. They might help you in the outcome. They might be the reason why you have a better outcome from your community engagement effort. So communication strategies often involve keeping them informed and seeking their input when relevant. Low power, low interest stakeholders that falls into this category. You just have to monitor them, but you may not want to invest more on their communication efforts. The reason you need to monitor them is because they might move from that category to another category, so that once they move from that category, you will know how to engage. For instance, the low some stakeholders in the low power, low interest category could decide to move to the low power, high interest category. So because you are monitoring them, you would be able to know when some of these stakeholders have moved from this quadrant to another quadrant. So that is that about the stakeholder engagement matrix. It is very important because this will help you to know who are the stakeholders you should focus your engagement strategies on. Also, it will help you devise different engagement strategies because you now understand their engagement, the category of their engagement. All right, we also have network analysis because we just finished talking about the engagement preference. The engagement preference led us to how we are able to analyze the stakeholders matrix, the stakeholders engagement matrix. So this is another technique of analyzing. So this is another strategies for analyzing the stakeholder interest, influence, and potential contribution. So you might also want to carry out network analysis. Network analysis means that you need to map out stakeholders and see how related they are with one another. If stakeholder A is in some kind of connection with stakeholder B, that means if you are striving to get the buy-in of stakeholder A, you know that you need to also strive to get this the buy-in of stakeholder B? Because they have some kind of relationship. So whatever that is tailored towards these stakeholders who have similar relationship or who have a relationship in some way should also be tailored towards the other stakeholders. Another thing is when you're able to know the networks of these stakeholders, you'll be able to identify the central figures. So you might want to approach the central figures. For example, we have some NGOs, organizations that has formed coalition. We have coalition of organizations. Coalition is just like when several organization comes under one body. So you might want to approach this coalition, this body, instead of approaching or engaging these stakeholders individually. So if we have 5 or 10 organizations under one body, instead of you to start approaching each of these stakeholders, you may want to go to the central figure, which is like the body, who will help you to get the buy-in. So this also saves time and also helps you to allocate resources accordingly. We also have prioritization matrix. The prioritization matrix is another strategy of analyzing your stakeholders' interests, influence, and potential contribution. So when you plot out the prioritization matrix, it will help you prioritize stakeholders based on their interests and influence. So after you have mapped out your stakeholders, you have mapped out the power interests of your stakeholders, you may now want to start grouping them based on priority, based on their combination of interest and influence. So this is also another strategy to analyze the interest, the influence, and potential contribution. We have talked about stakeholder mapping of interest and influence. We have talked about the assessment of potential contributions. We have also talked about the engagement preference. Okay, so another thing is performing SWOT analysis. You have to perform SWOT analysis. After you have mapped your stakeholders, you now know who has the high influence, the high interest, the low interest, the low influence. You already grouped them. You know who to monitor. You know who to engage closely. You know who to engage all the time. You need to also perform SWOT analysis. You need to look at each of these stakeholder group and evaluate their strengths, their weaknesses, their potential contributions and challenges. So SWOT means strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now, looking at their strengths, you may want to see what is their strength and how can their strength contribute to your community engagement efforts. Because you are preparing for your community engagement effort, you need to check all these things because it will help you when you want to start designing your community engagement efforts or initiatives. So you need to evaluate their strengths, you need to evaluate their weaknesses, you need to evaluate their potential contributions. So doing this will help you to know which of the organizations to focus more on, which of the organization has more potential contributions to your engagement efforts. You also can conduct workshops, participatory workshops. You can organize workshops that involve stakeholders, where you are able to discuss with them to know their interests and contributions. Remember that the first thing you need to do is to identify your stakeholders. We have talked about different techniques to identify your stakeholders. It is not enough to just identify your stakeholders. It is also important to analyze their interest. You also need to analyze their influence and also know their potential contribution, because this is very important on the outcome of your community engagement. So you can organize workshops that will enable open dialogue. So this will help you to understand deeper how well these stakeholders can contribute to your engagement, the community engagement efforts. You could also use the feedback and reflection session from time to time. Because you have already identified your stakeholders, you can start gathering feedback from them. So after you have noted their engagement matrix, you have already noted who to monitor closely and who to engage from time to time, you can start getting to gather feedbacks regularly from them after every engagement activities. From there, you'll be able to know how well they are invested in your community engagement efforts, even before starting to implement your community engagement efforts. You need to continue to monitor them, continuously monitor them, their responses, how well are they responding. Even from their responses, how well they are responding, you may want to also understand how much interest they have. You would be able to understand the level of interest they have towards the community engagement effort you are trying to embark on. So let's look at this activity. This activity is not graded, but this is what you'll be doing on the course platform. So from your knowledge of stakeholder mapping, I want you to create a stakeholder map. You could do that in your notes. It's not necessary for you to put it on the course platform, but you can decide to put it on the course platform. Now, I want you to think about a community engagement initiative, and from there, map out your stakeholders. Create a stakeholder map and use that stakeholder map to identify your key stakeholders and their interests. So that is an activity for you. In summary, this module is about identifying stakeholders and target audiences. We have talked about the importance of identifying your stakeholders. We have also talked about the characterizing of stakeholders into 3 categories. We talked about the primary stakeholders, the secondary stakeholders, and the key stakeholders. We also talked about target audiences. Your target audiences are the people that your initiative is aimed at. Those are the people you will be engaging, your direct participants of that initiative, people that will be involved in whatever your initiative is about. So let's look at the module 2.2 preview. We'll be talking about evaluating community needs and assets. In the next module, we'll be talking about how you can assess community needs and assets, and also ethical considerations and cultural sensitivity. After you have understood who your stakeholders are, you need to also check the needs of the community you want to engage. You need to understand their needs so that you'll be able to tailor your community engagement towards the needs of the community. This will help you to manage your resources and to have a better outcome from your community engagement efforts. See you in the next module.